Okay, welcome back again. So I am Dr. Daniel Handysides, although most of you know me as Danny. It's a pleasure to meet with Brian again. He's another one of my friends. Just to continue that series that we've been doing. It's my privilege, and it's my absolute privilege to keep the discussion of race and racism and the lack of equality in America going. It's not something that we just should talk about when unfortunate murders occur. And it's not something we think about for 8 minutes and put a Black Lives Matter tag up. This is something that has to be solved, and it's not going to be solved fast. So, Brian, who are you and how do you know me?
All right, Dave, thank you so much just for extending this invitation for me to come on and have this discussion with you. So I'm actually a lawyer in Washington, D.C. I have been practicing for the past 2 years in the healthcare and life science space. Previous to this, my background, I've got about 10 years in the public health arena. You and I actually connected as you were my mentor coming into my doctorate program. And I think you were the first voice of reassurance for me as I entered the program, not knowing what to expect. Like, holy cow, how am I going to even write a dissertation? I don't even have an idea. And you were like, oh, no, man, you've got this. You're going to rock this thing out. Piece of cake. I was like, that's what I needed to hear,
And he did.
So just a general background regarding me. Over the past, I guess, decade or so, I had been in school. My background was in public health and business. I had finished a master's in public health and business degree at Claremont Graduate University before coming to Loma Linda in 2014, I believe, for my doctorate program, which I focused in health promotion and education. And my dissertation focused on looking at risks or issues relative to stress among African-American males is in comparison to other subgroups, looking at Caribbean males as well as those who migrated from Africa, just to determine what differences there were in terms of specific stresses, social support, as well as other economic and environmental factors that might contribute to the overall experience and their risk of developing cardiovascular disease over time. And so that kind of has always been something that resonated with me in my career. Especially, unfortunately, I've lost family members who had cardiovascular disease issues, but also racism was something that did plague their lives. And I was curious about, to what extent does that actually contribute to one's overall health, especially as an African American in this country?
So what is your personal experience with racism?
So honestly, I've experienced it as far back as elementary school. I remember being called the N-word by several classmates. Of course, kids are just say whatever comes to mind. So it was something that was confusing. I didn't understand the context of it until later as, I began learning more about slavery and the issues between Black and white in this country. Even throughout my junior high training, I remember it felt different being, one of a couple of Black kids in my class, and always questions relative to the authenticity of my work. I had it, and it was honestly just the beginning, because I experienced this through college. I've experienced it even in my graduate and doctorate program, where non-Black professors wondered whether or not I could be able to put together such quality writing without having plagiarized. And so I've been accustomed to always doing more to authenticate my work, to show my sources, to be able to present these when having a discussion with a professor or teacher, whomever, so that it validates that, yes, I actually did put this together. I do know what I'm talking about to some extent. So it's something that, though it was frustrating, I accustomed myself to it, and I expected this to come. So this was something I honestly learned from my own parents, and my father had told me, to always go above and make sure you validate and make sure, you always cover yourself so that no one can ever label you or come up with some type of theory that you might have cheated, or this might not be reflective of the type of work that you put together as a person. So that has been honestly one of the biggest things I've dealt with in the academic space. Of course, I have experienced just day-to-day racism, whether it is, being pulled over for whatever reason, or it's, just even seeing it with close friends and family members who just for of no reason, just because you fit a profile, because you fit a specific look, you were stopped and you're questioned. And it was something for me personally, having grown up, my parents were had me structure my life in a certain way where I didn't come off in a way that might appear threatening,
Mm.
or that might become controversial, but always to, when I encounter a police officer, make sure you interact in this yes sir, no sir, making sure when, if I'm pulled over, both my hands are on the
Mm.
wheel, that I'm moving extremely slow with pulling out my wallet and always making sure I'm doing everything possible to ensure that I'm not a threat.
Mm.
And that's something that has stayed with me. And it's a constant, it's anxiety, it brings a lot of anxiety, it brings a lot of stress, there is fear that does come with it as well,
Mm.
but it becomes a norm after a while.
And I think that one of the differences is, listening to that, white kids are taught to be polite too, but for the reason that you might get out of a ticket.
Right.
Like my parents never said to me, be careful for your life. They would say things like, well, the more polite you are to an officer, and if you try and crack jokes, you might get a warning. And so it was always, it was like, oh, hi, officer. How are you? Oh, was I speeding? Oh, I'm so sorry. Like it's the humor of it. And that the subtle difference of this man will not kill me versus disproportionately, there are incidences that they do. And that's a challenge. It's a hard thing. If there's one thing that you could change short term, we're not going to solve racism. The whole point of this series, all the videos that you guys are watching, we're not going to solve it. This is a human issue that has lasted since humanity has existed. And in the American context, it was from the bedrock of the nation till less than 150 years ago. Let's be very clear. This isn't ancient. This is my great grandma. Or, if your grandma lived a long time, she was born just afterwards. And this isn't long. But if there was one thing you could change, what would it be?
You know what? I think the starting point would really be looking at the overall social constructs, because it is the constructs and theories a lot of times that affect attitudes and beliefs.
Hmm.
We see it very clearly just from, racism didn't just originate out of nowhere. It came with a thought, it came with a theory. And a lot of it was validated through biological theories, some spiritual religious theories, some political reasoning as well. And as these theories were put together, you then had, and they were constantly spread from one person to the other, and another person built on that theory. All of a sudden, these theories were used to validate attitudes and beliefs and to treat people in certain ways. I know there's, for example, Carl von Linnaeus. He's the father of biological taxonomy. He was alive in the 1700s, and he put together each race and ascribed with them specific characteristics relative to their individuals. I remember for Africans particularly, because I believe I mentioned it in my dissertation, he talked about blacks being lazy and negligent and governed by caprice. He talked about Native Americans being stubborn and easily angered. And what ended up happening is that over time, these classifications were used by many European countries to validate conquering or subjecting these members of lower races to what they felt best. Even from things that I've studied relative to religion, showing a sense of superiority, that God cursed, persons of the black race, that they came from the seed of Ham, and spiritual scripture says, that Ham shall forever be subservient to his brothers. And so it was reading so many of these contexts it validated the treatment, particularly of African Americans or African people, Black people. And so, in order to be able to see change, we've got to remove re-examine these social constructs that we've built our society off of
Mm.
and built our own attitudes and beliefs off, and see, look to deconstruct them and put in place in a new social construct, because it is only then that we'll begin seeing perhaps new perspectives relative to attitudes and beliefs. Because every time I turn on the television, many times I do see negative images or attitudes relative to Black persons. I'm saying, what, that visual is not reflective of the total population. When you look at Black people all together in general, you find so many different personalities.
Sure.
And to broadcast only one or two images and have that synonymous with the entire group,
Mm.
it's not a fair caricature at all. And
Yeah.
so to be able to say, okay, sure, there are persons who are like that, but there are also those who are like this and like this. It gives, I think it shows for humanity, we're all different persons. And
Yeah.
within each nationality, you have different personalities. And so the same context should be taken with any group, Black Americans as well as any other group, that
Yeah.
there are persons that are different within each subgroup. So that is something that I feel passionately I would love to see change and a dialogue had in terms of how can we deconstruct these previous social constructs and look to place in a new one that really reflects just who we are in the current day status of people that is fighting for equity, that is
Mm.
really fighting, pushing for equality.
Mm. I like that. And the one thing that you said that really stood out to me was the fact that we can't make these assumptions. Culture is a fantastic thing, and it pisses me off when people say, "Oh, I'm colorblind. I don't see color." It's like, well, then how? And the irony is, the next thing they say is, "I have 3 Hispanic friends." It's like, well,
Right.
how did you know you had 3 Hispanic friends if you don't see color? Like, literally, you shouldn't be able to tell. And there is wonderful diversity, and I don't want to get rid of that. But I have one of my LGBT friends, a young gay man out in California. He said, "You know what I hate is that I'm labeled as a gay man." He's like, "That's a part of me," but he's like, "That's such a small part of me," and it pains me that when I started this project and I was like, I'm going to do this, I went through my Facebook feed and I was like, oh, cool. Let me ask all my brothers of color and my sisters of color. But there's a demarcator, and it's not, let me talk to Dr. Hedgeman. Let me talk to this one phenotypical expression, and your story will be so different than every other story. And I think that's the trouble, that's what bugs me most about racism, is that we lump it, and that's the challenge. Is you sit there. Are there absolute, let's use a totally politically incorrect term, are there thugs who are Black? Absolutely there are. There's also thugs who are white. They wear Hawaiian shirts and picket with protest signs and try and go to North Carolina and say, the alt-right matters. You go, you are a thug. You are not a part of society. You don't have the benefit for everybody, but it has nothing to do with the individual. And that's where it bugs me. And so when you say that change, going back to the fundamentals, I think that's a powerful thing. Why do we say there's a difference? What does it mean if we actually were completely colorblind, which I don't like, because I do like Jamaican food and I know the difference between that and Barbados and Trini food. And, don't just make it all the same. Not all white people like to eat the same thing. You want that diversity. And I guess that comes to my next point. Your world is not the same as my world. We may live in the same America, but it's different. And if there was only one thing that your white friends could really understand about your world, what would it be?
That's a great question. It takes me to a piece that a colleague of mine actually wrote in the Atlanta Tribune, where he talked about racism being America's first pandemic. If you think about during these past few months where we have lived in, as we described, a quarantine where we've been cautious about all of our actions, whether it is just the day-to-day of encountering a person, making sure we're 6 feet apart, we have our masks on, we're following directions and guidelines, I'm making sure to sanitize all my surfaces and anything I touch, gotta wash my hands and all that. And you're so concerned in terms of just making sure you're doing everything possible to protect yourself, but also protect those around you as well. However, you understand that a mistake or exposure to something on accident could completely change your health. And, it could be a life or death situation for yourself or those around you. We have been dealing with this for a few months, but persons like myself, we have been dealing with stuff like this for our own lives relative to racism. Because I often I find myself, if I'm walking by a police officer, I'm immediately thinking, how can I walk by this person and come off in the least threatening way possible? How is my eye contact with them? Is my clothing okay? Is it something that doesn't give off, oh, he might look like a suspicious person. We may have to stop and frisk him. How is my tone? Any type of interaction, if I'm coming across even just persons at my workplace, how I'm judged, how my work product is, how I am communicating back and forth with person to person. Danny, I can tell you there was even an occasion I was in probably my third year of my graduate program. I remember there was a woman who had a number of boxes in her hand. She was struggling to walk to her car and get them there. And I stopped and offered to assist her. Within probably 30 seconds, I see a person from security come out walking towards us, and his hand is on his waist as though he was about to draw something. And the woman looked at me and then looked over at him and said, "Sir, is there a problem?" And he stopped in his footsteps and said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I was just checking," and went about his way. And I realized that in that moment, here it is, I'm, college educated, graduate student,
Being a good dude.
being a good person, thinking that, and I could have been misperceived as possibly attacking or robbing this person. And had she not said anything, had she not even noticed in the same way, what could have escalated? What might have escalated,
That, yeah. These are tiny videos. We're not getting into depth. And I think for those people watching it, the challenge is you're seeing all sorts of diversity. And my question is, when we look at the number of young men who have been mowed down, the George Floyds of the world, their stories were not heard. And did they make mistakes? Absolutely. We all have. I would hate for somebody to know the secrets of my life, for somebody to look at it all. I mean, the highs, the lows. We're human. We all screw up, and we all screw up royally, particularly when we're kids. But these discussions are important, and it sort of hit me in the gut when you said the last few months we've all been hyper vigilant. That's a tiring thing, And I read a quote, and I think it's an important thing for everybody to realize. Thank God that Black America is fighting for equality, not revenge.
Absolutely.
So you talk about grace and the bigness to forgive. The Black, Indigenous, and people of color of America, they're not saying, no, we want to do an eye for an eye. They're saying we want equality. And I think that's important. I do have one last question for you. Very serious, very deep question. What's your favorite ice cream?
Oh man, I have to dig deep for this one. Cookies and cream.
Ooh.
Cookies and cream has always been my go-to since I was younger. You can't beat those flavors. The nice sweetness, the Oreo crunch.
That is good. I do like cookies and cream. I always go with a sea salt caramel or something like that. But cookies.
Another good one.
Yeah. Although I've never actually had a bad ice cream. That's not true. What's that Japanese ice cream? Mochi? It's like
yeah.
I don't like that. I don't like that. So you know, preference of tastes. Although as my 6-year-old, and you have a 6-year-old as well, I know my 6-year-old reminds me, because they have a saying at school, don't yuck my yum. So if you like mochi, don't hold this against it. Don't
Right.
hold it against me. But Brian, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate your time. Be safe. It's not the easiest time in America, but it never has been. So take care.
Hey, you too, my friend. Thanks so much.